Hi there, my name is Amanda Gross. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a student at the European Graduate School studying Expressive Arts, and I'm excited to share with you a brief presentation that I have here about expressive arts for autoethnographic research. And specifically, I'm looking at a constellation of methods for collective liberation. So I'm going to share my screen here. And my research, so I actually am have been doing anti-racist organizing for quite some time and have been working on a manuscript for the past 8 years that's specifically looking at white womanhood. And also in that, I'm doing a lot of considering, how I was socialized as a white girl and a white woman, and how those families happen, how those dynamics happen generationally, like with my family and culture. And so I do a lot of unpacking specific things in my family. I talk about folks and relationships, and sometimes that's not always anonymous if I'm unpacking a parent-child dynamic. So my research has been around how to really create a space using expressive arts, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but very broadly, in a decolonized definition of art, using these different processes to support myself and family members to engage in conversations about what I've written. So a constellation of methods that comes from Kathy Charmaz, and I've really used a variety of autoethnographic, expressive arts, and arts-based approaches, and then also grounded theory methods. So I just a note on the nested model, which is also something that has shaped my research. I started making these little nests or trauma containers like the ones that you saw here on the first page. And these really began as a way for me to hold space for other people's trauma narratives and stories so that I wouldn't internalize them as my own, but I could also still honor those stories and hold them as sacred. And so I think a lot about these trauma containers, and that was actually the image that I used and worked with throughout all aspects of my research. And they are these like little nests, right? They can hold us and hold us hopefully gently and with care as we do hard things together. And a lot of my questions were around like, how do we co-create those containers? But I have used Marie Dugan's nested model to think about how all of these different aspects of ourselves, right? It's not just us and another person or myself and a family member who was going to have conversation in my research, but also we were bringing in, our family systems dynamic, the way that we are seen by institutions and systems, the different ways that we have access to different types of culture, that culture has shaped us, and also our own ideologies and worldviews and spiritual practices, along with our interpersonal sphere of the things that we've internalized and our thoughts, our interiority, and our embodiment, right? The ways that we've stored these coping mechanisms in our body, or they can come out and be triggered in different ways. So I really wanted to make sure that all of my research had this nested model throughout. And as a result, I also used these nested questions in thinking about my theory, methods, and design. So my big overarching theoretical question is, how can arts and culture very broadly support white settlers in sustaining long-term engagement with anti-racism and decolonization, and towards the goal, right, towards the goal of multi-generational healing and collective liberation. And then, my specific methods and my process was around how to do this with family members as they read excerpts of my autoethnographic text. So how will I engage with those family members around the content of what I've written? What are our containers for that engagement? How are we co-creating the space? What are our shared values? How could expressive arts and other methods support those processes? And always, how will I do this ethical autoethnography throughout and for social justice? And so I've been using the phrase abolitionist ethics which is kind of a whole separate thing. But I really tried to look at these different ways that power and harm and agency, how those in history all impact our relationships, and how could I really think be very considerate and think very deeply about my impact, especially as the person who had, authorial power, both in writing the manuscript and also in writing my dissertation. And then within the data collection design, my questions were around how do family members experience the text? What are their emotional and embodied processes? What are they attracted to? What do they disagree with? How can we express those things together, and to do so honestly and vulnerably with space for emotion? And, how can we have healthy disagreement, right? And stay in ongoing relationship, which was also, one of my goals with this, was to be able to have better and stronger relationships with family members on the other side of this research. And how do we care, for ourselves and also for each other when engaging in hard, sometimes difficult things? And then I also use this nested model in my research design. So here I'll just point to phase one, how I used arts-based practices, both within how my family members and I came together, but also in preparation. So for me, it was really important to get into the art and to make containers as a way of identifying my own values for my research and in general, and being really transparent about that, so that when I came to family members, to my research participants, I could let them know where I was coming from. And then also I created, a small trauma container for each session. I did one-on-ones, and then I had 2 group sessions. And that was a way of helping me to prepare and ground. And then I came back to those, especially during the transcription process. I put them on my desk, and especially when there was a couple of sessions brought up a lot of emotional, hard things for me. And so those were good reminders of what I needed and how I could support myself, and just to be with it, right? To be with those hard emotions and some of the fears that maybe came up for me around potential rupture, within relationships, or, what might this mean? So I want to share at least one story here about the types of expressive arts and arts-based methods that I use. And it was important for me to get into a little bit of theory around decolonizing art and what that could look like. And in my family, often I'm talked about as like the artist, because I have a background of painting and drawing, and I studied it in undergrad, and now I'm a weaver and a fiber artist. But there are so many ways that my family members are creative, and I think are artists and artistic, and not all of those ways, have been honored as work or skill or artistry. And so I tried to, it was a wonderful opportunity to think about each family member and our relationship, and offer them, an arts-based activity that I thought would be really relevant. And so the family member in the photograph, I invited them to choose a recipe that, they felt like connected to our family and that we could make together. And so what they chose to do was to ask another family member, an elder who's a generation older, what their favorite cake is. And that family elder surprised us both by saying Italian wedding cake, which is not part of my family's heritage, nor something that none of either of us, the family member participant, nor I had ever made, or I don't know that I had ever had it. So we had about a whole day of baking this cake, letting it cool, making the icing the cake, taking it to the elder family member and eating it together and sharing stories. And it just, it helped co-create this space where even the act of cooking and doing this together brought up a lot of stories and memories and values. And so when I asked this participant, what their values were related to our family, or what values they thought were important, like hospitality was one of the themes that came up. And so this participant was talking about, how they learned that from older generations, and especially there's a value within the family of learning from others and travel, and that inviting people, being hospitable to strangers or folks who maybe we don't know, in addition to friends and family that we do, is a really important value. And that's it's so integral to cooking, and especially to women cooking and being in the kitchen and passing down recipes and stories and hospitality in that way. So that was a big theme that came through. And the trees on the right are actually trees at my grandparents' previous home, and where a lot of the sessions were happening were actually pretty close to that space. And so I won't go into this now, but I do consider a lot collective connection to place and what that means as, folks that are continue to be settlers on Indigenous land, and what does it mean to have a relationship with place here under those circumstances? And then, so abolitionist ethics, which I referred to earlier, I think here I talked a little bit already about what I mean by decolonizing art. This idea of like cultural appropriation and cultural relevance was also something that came up in different ways. And mostly it wasn't cultural appropriation wasn't too much of a theme in terms of the art space and expressive art space activities that I chose, which included, along with cooking, singing songs that have been important to my family, and those are all grounded in my family's lineage, and then also storytelling, oral storytelling, and images, sharing photos and slides, and laughter and humor around that. So those were kind of the main, and some around family artifacts. But where I, considered and talked about cultural appropriation the most in my dissertation was around embodiment. And my lineage is Swiss German Mennonite, and that's part of the identity of almost all of the family members. Not all, but that's part of our family lineage overall. And so, within that history, Puritanism and patriarchy in Europe really had an effect of a lot of disembodiment, of seeing the body as sinful and something that we should be disconnected to or have mastery and control over. And so I think where I struggle the most around how to support myself and family members in this process is that embodiment aspect, because we have depending on how you look at it, lost or sacrificed a lot of those embodiment practices, collective embodiment practices that were indigenous to us going way back. And so one of my, the ways that I've engaged with that has been through studying East Indian Raja Yoga. And so I was able to engage some of those skills, to use some of my skills when to prepare family members to go into, especially the group session, right, to take a moment and center ourselves. And then also when things got difficult or emotionally charged, those were skills that I drew on. So I do discuss that a little bit in my dissertation. And then I think I'll end here with drawing on Grace Lee Boggs' concept of the solutionary, which is that, Boggs says that the real revolutionaries are those who are doing solutions-based work. And that was a real revelation finding that came up for me at the end as I was going through analyzing my data and going back through, was noticing how many culturally relevant practices my family already has and that we have been doing that can support us in furthering the work of anti-racism and decolonization, and also staying in relationship and doing this in a way that is promoting multi-generational healing and moving us towards collective liberation. And so as someone who has come from more of a critical analysis deficit mindset, that was a big moment for me to shift my own thinking and how I was looking at family cultural practices, and all of the ways that they might also be connected to white culture or might also be connected to patriarchy, but to begin to also identify the ways that the potential that they have to support us in moving towards in other directions, and also the ways that they already have. So thank you very much.